What is going on, everybody? What is going on? What is going on? What is going on? Kind of an impromptu stream today, man. Was not planning on going live today, but a couple hours ago, we received some news. And I think it was some news that obviously, we were anticipating maybe a little bit sooner. However, with that being said, it has happened, man. Jimmy Lake has been fired as the defensive coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons. He has been relieved of his duties, parted ways with the Atlanta Falcons. I'm going to pull up the official tweet the Falcons put out. Ian Rappaport was the first to officially report on the news. But here it is from the Atlanta Falcons. We have parted ways with defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake and defensive line coach Jay Rodgers. Now, obviously, what we saw from the Falcons defense for really a better part of this season was an inconsistent roller coaster where we saw flashes from the defense at times, especially after the bye week. We saw them be able to get to the quarterback more, but in the first 11 games heading into the bye week, this team actually only had 10 sacks going into the bye week. And when you're in the NFL, when you're in the National Football League, and your defense is only getting 10 sacks through the first 11 weeks of the year, it's not going to look good for you. It's not going to look good for anything you have going with your defense. And honestly, the fact that we were 6-5 at that point, in spite of that, I think just goes to show you kind of what the story was for a lot of that first portion of the season. The Falcons really tried to play a lot of bend but don't break defense. That's the mentality that they carried throughout that time period. And it worked somewhat. You can say that, yes, it did work against maybe the Eagles, or it worked against Tampa. But ultimately, we saw sooner rather than later that defense get exposed. And we saw it obviously in Minnesota get 42 points hung up on them. Sam Darnold had the best game of his career on the Falcons, had a career day. Obviously, Washington with Jaden Daniels, and that defense was worn out. But, that defense had no answer in the second half of that game in overtime for Jaden Daniels. But I really think the epitome, what was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for Jimmy Lake was when his defense came out just a week ago and allowed 44 points to the Carolina Panthers and Bryce Young. And Bryce Young was actually benched earlier this season. And it's not to, discount, obviously, Bryce Young. Yes, they did a solid job with turning Bryce Young around in Carolina. However, with that being said, there is no denying that there was a obvious serious issue that the Falcons had with their defense throughout much of the season. Now, the problems also were not limited to the defense. So let's make that clear. But the defense, for the players that were on this team, it definitely felt like they were underperforming. So let me just make that clear. When you put it in that instance, yes, Jimmy Lake deserved to get fired. This is not one of those situations where Jimmy Lake, didn't do that bad of a job with the defense. Jimmy Lake didn't know what he was doing with this defense. That's why I think we saw in the bye week, Raheem Morris really take charge in a lot of this defense. And, maybe you can say he was instrumental in getting those sack numbers up to, at least NFL level, because when you have 10 sacks in 11 weeks through a football season, that's not even at a pro level. So I think you definitely look at Raheem Morris and you say, yeah, he was probably instrumental in a lot of that. But I think while there's a lot of people that are happy Jimmy Lake is fired, that feel like, God damn, excuse me, that feel like Jimmy Lake did deserve to get fired and this was the right decision. I also believe we really need to have a conversation here, not so much about Jimmy Lake, because we saw what Jimmy Lake did this season. We saw that Jimmy Lake is a college coach. He ran a college scheme. He is a college coach. He before I want to say that Jimmy Lake, let me pull up his track record, because obviously he was the head coach of the Washington Huskies. And that's really, he spent a lot of time in Washington, spent some time. He's been around the NFL as an assistant and a DB's coach and, stuff like that. He spent one season with the Los Angeles Rams, but, outside of stints as a DB's coach, Jimmy Lake, is a college guy. That is really where you have seen Jimmy Lake, have some of his success at. And he wasn't even really that good at Washington either. So I think the question is, why was Jimmy Lake hired? I think the reason why Jimmy Lake was hired is this was a coaching hire, because we need to go back to when Raheem Morris was brought in as head coach and what he said he wanted to do. He said that he didn't necessarily want to be, get into the weeds of what was going on offense and defense. He wanted to leave that to his coordinators. Now to Raheem Morris's credit, that is what a lot of the successful teams do end up doing. Obviously, Andy Reid in Kansas City is very instrumental in that offense, but he's Andy Reid, and not everyone else is Andy Reid. But you look at the Detroit Lions, for instance. Dan Campbell has two very good coordinators who are going to be head coaches, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. He lets them do the work. He made good coordinator hires. And then you can go around the league and look at some other instances where you clearly see that more times than not, if you're a head coach and you're having to get involved on one side of the ball, that can really distract you. That can take away from a lot of your priorities and goals, and that can create dysfunction. So I think Raheem Morris was going in saying, okay, I'm going to take the CEO approach, and I'm going to get some guys in here that, can at least do their jobs as coordinators. Fast forward, Raheem Morris ended up having to be pretty involved in this defense later on down the stretch, which, I'm not going to really say much of anything, because I don't know anything for a fact. I would love to be a fly on the wall and flowery branch. Maybe is what led to, some of the questionable calls we saw from Raheem Morris, because maybe he was having to worry about the defense more so than being able to just put trust in his coordinators. And the moment we really heard that report that Raheem Morris had been more involved with the defense, I think it's really where we kind of went, yeah, they don't trust Jimmy Lake. And now I do believe that this game, what really came down to it for Jimmy Lake was this Carolina game, and how you had Matthew Judon in coverage, how lazy this defense looked, how unmotivated. See, this is one of the biggest things about Jimmy Lake. You could tell if you go back and you watch clips before the season and you look at all the behind the scenes and training camp stuff the Falcons put out. There's a clip of Jimmy Lake explaining, all about, the so-called philosophy. Look around the room. they don't respect him one bit. Jesse Bates is looking at the wall. AJ Terrell's looking down. They're not listening to this dude. They're not buying this dude. We hear all about how, players, respect Raheem and love Raheem, as a coach, and Raheem's a player's coach. However, one of the big things we really need to account for is, well, that might be true. They certainly do not respect Jimmy Lake, and I think you could see that throughout a lot of the season. But I've got to be honest, that's not really why I'm here to talk about this. I'm here to talk about this because we need to really look at, I'm always going to say, look at what the situation was with Jimmy Lake. Jimmy Lake was a project defensive coordinator. He was a project coach. Jimmy Lake is a DB's coach, is a defensive quality control coach. That's really what he's always been. In the pro level anyway. College, sure, because college is different. However, at the pro level, we see, he's a DB's coach. Defensive quality control guy. Raheem Morris hired Jimmy Lake, number one, because they worked together for 1 year in LA, and it was someone that he knew. Jimmy Lake is probably a very good friend of Raheem's. Number two, Raheem had an ego, and I think Raheem wanted to prove something with Jimmy Lake. Wanted to prove a little bit of he knows what he's doing and he can be a genius by hiring Jimmy Lake and hoping and praying Jimmy Lake would turn out well. But honestly, I think the plan was with Jimmy Lake is as long as the defense can be serviceable the first year and we get to the playoffs, let's just hope and pray he can get better as a coordinator. Now, when I saw Jimmy Lake, I looked at this guy and I said, there is no effing way that this guy will ever be an NFL head coach. There is no way. I look at Zach Robinson and I say in 2 years he's going to be an NFL head coach, especially if things stay on pace with where they're headed with this offense. Zach Robinson will be an NFL head coach maybe next year, because look at really the coaching cycle this offseason and how thin it is, and all the good candidates out there like Vrabel and Brian Flores. I would have to think this is the year Ben Johnson takes a job. They're all going to, so that's really going to leave, a lack of quality candidates, which could allow, if, this offense continues to stay pace, a Zach Robinson climbing up the ranks as a potential head coach candidate. I look at Zach Robinson and I say he's going to be an NFL head coach pretty damn soon. Jimmy Lake, I never said that with. And I'm going to be completely honest. If I am looking at you as a coordinator and I am saying that you either have not had head coaching experience or I don't see, because let's be honest. Now, what defines a good head coach? Okay, how successful their teams are, how many times they make the playoffs or win their division, how guys respect them, so on and so forth. But head coaching material is a whole different thing. You can look at several guys and say, yeah, they certainly didn't get the results, but they became head coaches because they at least came off of having head coaching material. I never even saw head coaching material with Jimmy Lake. He is an assistant. That is who he is. He's an assistant. He is not a guy that you're going to respect. That's how he came off. And I think that's how, honestly, a lot of people in the Falcons organization with the right thinking had to view him as well. The reason why we saw this play out with Jimmy Lake and them hire him is that because they had, I think it was either Raheem wanted to prove a point, or, now I think this could actually be a very real scenario, was Jimmy Lake always hired to be the fall guy? did Raheem think, we're talking this big game where, committing to the playoffs, we get Kirk Cousins, or, they didn't get Kirk Cousins yet, but we got plans to probably make a splash at quarterback. And if it doesn't work out, we're going to need a fall guy. And Jimmy Lake is going to be an easy fall guy because at the end of the day, the Jimmy Lake hire as defensive coordinator wasn't really wowing any of us Falcons fans to begin with. So, was that the thinking? Was Raheem always covering his ass? Was the Jimmy Lake hire in reality insurance? And if it was, I really don't know how to think about that. I really don't. If anything, I think that tells me you honestly did not prepare this team for success. If that was the case, you were not preparing this team for success. Now, as far as Jimmy Lake goes as a person, look, I don't know him as a person. I don't know what the type of person that he is. I'm sure, I think he's got a wife and kids. I'm sure he's a decent father. I'm sure he does his best. He was trying to put food on the table. Raheem Morris is who hired Jimmy Lake. So that's why, we could blame Jimmy Lake all we want. He should have never been hired. And I've told y'all, I don't think Raheem Morris should have ever been hired as the head coach of this team. So really that puts things in kind of an influx almost for the Falcons organization and really where things stand. So where do we go now, obviously, with the defense? Because let's be clear about this. This is now going to be 4 years, 4 new defensive coordinators. That's what this is going to be. Dean Pease in 22, Ryan Nielsen in 2023, Jimmy Lake in 2024, and we're going to have a new one for 2025. And I think, that is the one thing with hiring Jimmy Lake, because you need consistency at least for 2 or 3 years. You're not always going to have the same coordinators 5, 6, 7 years. But if you can't at least be in a position to where you can establish consistency with your defense for at least 2 or 3 seasons, then you're not setting things up for success. You don't do justice for the offensive side of the football and for this football team. Because now this is going to have to be another year, a guy like Arnold Ebiketie getting accustomed to a new guy running this defense, getting accustomed to what they like, how they like to run things. It's going to be the same thing. A guy like Caden Ellis, he was finally, really finding his spot in this defense, and now he's maybe someone wants to use Caden Ellis differently, for all we know. So you really look at this defense and you say it's going to be another year of another change at the defensive coordinator. Now let's be very clear. Whoever is hired next as defensive coordinator, and when we get word on that, I would probably anticipate, they're gonna go through their search. I probably wouldn't anticipate it being, for another few weeks. I think by the conference championships, we should have our new defensive coordinator. And whenever we do hire our new defensive coordinator, I will be going live, talking about it, expressing my opinions about it. And by the way, the number one thing is it needs to be a guy who is a NFL coach, and honestly, a guy who preferably has been at least a defensive coordinator before, or even had head coaching experience, because we're not in a position to go with a flashy project hire, hoping he works out and hoping eventually he can develop a nice defense. No, we need to go with a guy who knows what he's doing and a guy who can run an NFL defense. And ask him, well, who that is. And I think the first name that's going to come to mind for many is Robert Saleh, and I'd love Robert Saleh here as this team's defensive coordinator. I'd love to see it. I believe though Robert Saleh still is in some agreements with the Packers. Maybe he stays there. Robert Saleh is also getting head coaching interviews right now. But listen, I'd love to see Robert Saleh here as defense coordinator, and it could be possible. The name I would really look out for at this point is a name that's familiar to us in this division, Steve Wilks. Steve Wilks was actually up in Flowery Branch last year during a little bit of training camp. He was chatting with Raheem Morris, really looking at what was going on and what was up with this Falcons defense. So honestly, if you are asking me, I would probably say, and I'm not, betting man, but if I were to put money on it, I would say Steve Wilks has to be under serious consideration. I do believe that him and Raheem, have some sort of relationship. They've talked to each other. But I want to talk about that in a minute because that's going to lead me to another candidate. And it's not my favorite, but I am fully expecting it to possibly be the case. And it's fucking Jeff Ulbrich. I would not be shocked if they did bring Jeff Ulbrich back as defensive coordinator. I would not be shocked one bit because we've already seen that the Falcons are comfortable with bringing people from that failed coaching staff back. So why not just bring another back at that point? Now, I'm not hating on Jeff Ulbrich. I think Jeff Ulbrich certainly would be better than Jimmy Lake. I think Jeff Ulbrich at least knows what he's doing. And the thing with the Jets, I don't think the issues were necessarily defense with the Jets. The issues were quarterback play and just how dysfunctional of an organization the Jets are as it is. The defense wasn't really the issue. So if it was Jeff Ulbrich, I wouldn't necessarily be mad from a standpoint that I felt like we made a bad hire. What would really get me with that is it's once again a case of Raheem staying within the status quo, not even bringing in a little bit of fresh blood. It would essentially be at that point that then after that, why not you bring what was the guy's name? That was the defense coordinator, and he actually wasn't that bad as it was. Marquand Manuel. Why not bring Marquand Manuel back and put him somewhere on the staff at that point? That's what gets me about doing that stuff. Because we've seen time, and I've said this, I think if you were associated with that Super Bowl collapse, you shouldn't have even been allowed back in the building, much less given a job. But here we are. Raheem Morris was the number 2 to Dan Quinn, and he has a job here now as head coach. So I would not be shocked if Jeff Ulbrich were to be hired. I'm telling you, I'll prepare for it. I would love to see it be Steve Wilks or Robert Saleh or someone like that. There was one other name I was thinking about. There's one other name I was really thinking about. God, who was it? Who was the other name I was thinking about? It's really not with me right now. But I'm telling, listen, I would love to see it be Steve Wilks or Robert Saleh or Dennis Allen is who it was. Y'all are going to call me crazy. A guy who I would actually really like to be a defensive coordinator, and I do think it could work because I don't see him getting another head coaching opportunity anytime soon, is Dennis Allen. I would actually not be against that. Dennis Allen has some experience with some of these guys here. And I feel like that would be putting some of these guys into more of their comfort zone. But and another thing too, just like Steve Spagnuolo in Kansas City, Allen could be here for a while, so he really could develop that defense, and that defense actually knows what they want to be. However, I think the one big conflict with Dennis Allen is this is the reason we didn't keep Ryan Nielsen, and I feel like we need to really understand this. And I want to say as far as the 3-4 goes, in order to run the 3-4, you have to have that premier outside linebacker edge rusher. You got to have a TJ Watt, or you got to have a Micah Parsons or somebody like that. And you're not going to be in no damn position to go and get Abdul Carter, as much as I would love to have him here. You're not going to be in no damn position to go get a guy like that. So with that being said, I don't see Dennis Allen happening for that reason, because Raheem is more of a 3-4 guy. Even though, to be fair, Raheem was here in Atlanta, and you saw Dan Quinn run more of that 4-3 defense. So when you look at it from that perspective, that definitely, it's not, I'm not saying it's impossible. I think the reason why he didn't keep Ryan Nielsen last year was on top of obviously them deferring with what types of defenses I like to run and philosophies. Raheem really wanted to prove a point with cleaning house, and he didn't want to associate with Arthur Smith. We've seen Raheem taking shots at Arthur Smith, even though this motherfucker only comes out and does one game better than him. But it looked a whole lot sexier doing it. So it's good. It's good with the Falcons, because it looked a whole lot sexier. 8-9 looks a whole lot sexier than 7-10. Man, I don't know. But anyways, to run that defense, you really do have to have, with a 3-4 defense, that dominant outside linebacker. And the Falcons do not have that. Arnold Ebiketie is not a dominant 15-sack guy. I think if you put Arnold Ebiketie in a solid position where maybe you put some other guys around him and he's not the primary guy that people are having to focus on, he could, sneak in a 10-sack season. But he's more of a traditional 7 to 8 sack guy, which is not bad, but still, it's not a premier primary pass rusher that the Falcons have lacked for over a decade. And I'm telling y'all, if the Falcons do not address the defense this offseason, do not get this defense straight, no matter how good the offense is next year, it's going to make life really hard for them, because now we're looking at it to where Tampa Bay is obviously not slowing down, and now Carolina, they're going to have money this offseason. They're feeling really good about Bryce, and Bryce had a strong finish to the year. So really the only team you are going to be able to beat up on is the Aints. But listen, I'm telling y'all, man, the Aints are going to play us the next few years like their Super Bowl, because it's going to be all they can play for. But man, this next hire for defensive coordinator cannot be who Raheem Morris is best friends with. Who he's got the closest Snapchat numbers to. His homeboy. It can't be that. It's got to be the best guy for the job. In my opinion, I think the best guy for the job would be Robert Saleh. But I would also not be mad with Steve Wilks. I think Steve Wilks was definitely made the scapegoat in San Francisco. And I do think Steve Wilks could do a solid job with this defense. I do. And I'm not saying that Jeff Ulbrich would be a bad hire. I think, any of those guys I've talked about would be better than Jimmy Lake. But it's got to be the best guy, is what it's got to be. Because this next hire for defensive coordinator is going to determine Raheem Morris's job status after 2025, depending on what potentially goes down. So with that all being said, listen, Jimmy Lake should have never been hired in the first place. And I'm honestly under the belief they hired Jimmy Lake to be some sort of fall guy. in the instance that they needed it. And if that really was the case, I honestly hope that's not the case. But if that was the case, then it just shows maybe the Falcons weren't that serious about winning this year after all. Because the next guy you get as a defense coordinator, you talk about as a second-time head coach, you learn from your mistakes. Well, guess what? Raheem's just gotten another opportunity to learn from a mistake. And it's never put your trust in a college guy who runs a college scheme as defensive coordinator. If you don't feel comfortable enough or comfortable enough to just let him do his thing and you stay out of it, he's not the guy to be hired. So you need to go get someone who can be the team's defensive coordinator who preferably has actually had head coaching experience in the NFL. But someone who has a track record for putting good defenses out there. That's what we're going to need. But I wasn't really planning on staying that long. Obviously it's, the playoffs are on right now. There's still a little bit of snow on the ground, man. We got our first snowstorm for the first time in 7 years. And maybe that's what flips the switch. Maybe that's what got Jimmy Lake fired for all. I don't know. But anyways, I'm obviously, if y'all are asking me who I want as defense coordinator, I want either Robert Saleh or Steve Wilkes. But I'd be fully prepared, for it to be Jeff Ulbrich. And I'm not even saying Jeff Ulbrich, is a bad coach or anything. I just feel like then you're falling back into the hiring someone because you know them well, not hiring someone because they're going to bring a good defense. It's time to put the personal relationships to the side and throw it out of the fucking window, because this is a team that needs to win. Well, anyways, with that being said, guys, obviously we're going to see what the Falcons do with this defensive coordinator hire, but they got to get it right. That's what I'm going to tell y'all. They got to get it right. This is the off season for the Falcons has begun, and this is the first big move we made. And whether the Falcons get this hire right or not, it could really set the tone for this off season. But anyways, with that being said, I will see you all in the next one.